The auditor set down his pen, looked at the page one more time like he wanted to be sure, and then he read the number out loud. And for maybe 3 full seconds, nobody in that conference room breathed. My father's coffee stopped halfway to his mouth. My mother's hand went flat on the table, and my sister Vanessa, the one they'd just handed the entire company to 20 minutes earlier, went the color of the wall behind her. I didn't move. I want to tell you I felt something big in that moment, some rush of triumph. But the truth is, I just sat there with my hands folded in my lap, staring at the severance envelope they'd slid across to me before the auditor even walked in. Because that number he read, it was mine. It had always been mine. And every single person at that table was finally hearing, out loud, the thing I'd been to that family for 15 years, the thing they'd never once said thank you for. My name is Claire Donovan, and I gave the best years of my life to my parents' business here in Minneapolis. I started answering their phones when I was 22, back when the office still smelled like my dad's cheap cigars, and the heater only worked if you kicked it. I stayed late. I fixed the things nobody saw were broken. I rebuilt the accounts. I kept the biggest clients when they threatened to walk. I did the work. The quiet, invisible, unglamorous work that keeps the lights on. And I did it while watching my parents look at my younger sister like she hung the moon, and look at me like I was furniture that happened to be useful. So when they called that meeting to announce Vanessa would be taking over everything, the title, the ownership, the future, and then offered me a check to go away quietly, I almost took it. I almost stood up, said thank you, and walked out of the only place I'd ever really belonged. That was the plan. That's what a good daughter does, right? You swallow it. You leave. You don't make a scene. But there was a folder on that table too, and I knew what was in it. If you've ever been the one who does everything and gets seen for nothing, the reliable one, the invisible one, the kid who was never the favorite, then stay with me on this one because I think you're going to feel every second of it. Do me a small favor and hit that like button and subscribe, not for me, but because these are stories about real people getting seen at last, and there are a lot more of them coming. The question that morning was simple, and it sat in my chest like a stone. Was I going to take the check and disappear the way they wanted? Or was I finally going to let them find out exactly what they were losing? Let me back up to that morning, because the check didn't come out of nowhere, and neither did the number. It was a Tuesday, which felt wrong somehow. My mother had called it a family breakfast, and she'd made the good coffee, the kind she only pulled out for holidays, and I remember thinking that was a nice touch as I drove in. 15 years I'd been driving to that building on the north side of Minneapolis, past the same gas station and the same church with the crooked sign, and for most of those years I drove in feeling like I was going somewhere that needed me. That morning I still felt it. That's the part that gets me now, looking back. I walked in thinking I mattered. The company is called Donovan Supply, and it's not glamorous. We sell and deliver the boring things that keep hospitals and office towers and schools running, the cleaning products and the paper and the parts nobody thinks about until the day they run out. My grandfather started it out of a truck. My father grew it into a real business with a warehouse and a name people in this city recognized. And I was the one who kept it alive through the years when it almost didn't make it, though you'd never have known that from the way anyone talked at that table. My sister Vanessa was already there when I arrived, sitting close to our parents, and she gave me a little wave, the kind you give someone at a party you didn't expect to see. My father stood up to make his announcement the way he always made announcements, like he was doing everyone a favor by speaking. He said the family had made a decision about the future of the company. He talked about legacy, about who would carry the Donovan name forward. And then he looked at Vanessa, and my mother looked at Vanessa, and I understood the whole thing before he finished the sentence. The way you understand a phone call is bad news from the first word out of the other person's mouth. Vanessa would be taking over. Full ownership. The title. The building. The future. My father actually used the word ready, said she was finally ready, and I sat there doing the math in my head about how many times in 15 years anyone had called me ready for anything. Then my mother slid an envelope across the table toward me. Inside was a check and a single sheet of paper with the word severance printed at the top in a font somebody had picked out, which meant somebody had planned this, had sat at a computer and typed my ending into a template. The number on the check was small. I won't tell you exactly how small yet, because you need to understand what it was buying first. It was buying 15 years. It was buying every late night and every saved account and every crisis I'd walked into and walked back out of with the company still standing. And they'd decided that was worth about what a decent used car costs. I didn't say anything. I want you to understand that about me because it matters later. I have never been the one who makes noise. I'm the one who fixes the thing quietly and lets someone else take the meeting. So I just held the envelope and looked at it. And across the table, Vanessa said, "Claire, we really hope you'll stay on to help with the transition." And the word transition landed in my chest like a stone because I already knew what it meant. It meant they wanted me to hand over everything I'd built, gift-wrapped, to the sister they loved more, and then disappear with my little check and my dignity in a cardboard box. To understand why that morning hit the way it did, you have to go back to the beginning, to a 22-year-old who thought love was something you earned by being useful. I started answering phones at Donovan Supply the summer after college, and the office back then smelled like my dad's cheap cigars, and the heater in the corner only worked if you kicked it in exactly the right spot, which I learned my first week. I was supposed to be there temporarily, just helping out until I figured out my real life. But I was good at it. I was good at the thing nobody respects, which is noticing what's broken before it breaks all the way. Within a year, I wasn't answering phones anymore. I was fixing the books, because I'd found errors that had been quietly bleeding money for years and nobody had caught them. And once you catch something like that, it becomes yours whether you want it or not. Here's the thing about invisible work. It's invisible on purpose. When I renegotiated a supplier contract and saved the company $40,000 in a year, there was no meeting, no toast, no moment where anyone said Claire did this. The money just showed up in the account, and everyone assumed it had always been there. But when Vanessa, 4 years younger than me, breezed in one summer to help with marketing and redesign the company logo, my father framed a copy of it and hung it in his office and told the story of her doing it for years afterward, at dinners, to clients, to anyone who'd listen. That's not a complaint about the logo. The logo was fine. It's just that I learned early which kind of work got seen in our family and which kind didn't, and I was on the wrong side of that line, and I stayed on it for a very long time. The truth is, it started long before the company. Growing up, Vanessa was the one they photographed. She was the one whose report cards went on the fridge, the one whose recitals my father rearranged his week for. I got the leftover attention, the kind you get for being reliable, which is really no attention at all, because reliable is just a word for a person you've stopped worrying about. When I was a kid, I thought if I just got good enough at being helpful, one day the camera would turn to me. It never did. I just got better at being helpful, which meant I got better at being invisible. And by the time I was an adult, I'd built an entire personality out of it and called it being the responsible one. The account that would eventually change everything walked into my life on an ordinary afternoon about 10 years ago. Heartline Health, a regional hospital network with facilities all over the upper Midwest, was shopping for a new supply partner, and they were big. The kind of client that could double our revenue if we landed them and could sink us if we handled them badly. My father wanted the account, but he didn't want to do the work of winning it, so he handed it to me the way you hand someone a problem you've decided is beneath you. He told me not to embarrass the family. That was the extent of his coaching. I spent 3 months learning that hospital system better than the people who ran it. I drove out to their facilities in the snow. I learned how their supply chain actually worked, where the pain was, what their last vendor had gotten wrong. And I learned the name of the woman in purchasing whose approval you actually needed, a woman named Diane, who'd been burned by suppliers before and trusted no one on principle. Diane didn't want a pitch. She'd heard 1,000 pitches. What she wanted was someone who'd pick up the phone at 6 a.m. when a shipment was wrong and fix it before her nurses even noticed. So that's what I became. One delivery at a time, one solved problem at a time, one early morning phone call at a time. I earned the trust of a woman who trusted no one. There was one morning in particular that sealed it. A shipment of surgical supplies had gone to the wrong facility overnight. The kind of mistake that in a hospital isn't a paperwork problem, it's a real one, because somewhere a nurse is opening a supply closet that's supposed to have what she needs and doesn't. Diane called me at 5:40 in the morning, and I could hear in her voice that she was already composing the email to her boss about switching vendors. I didn't make an excuse. I got in my car in the dark. I drove to our warehouse. I loaded what she needed into my own trunk, and I delivered it to her loading dock myself before her shift even started. And I stood there in the cold while she checked every box. She didn't thank me that day. She just looked at me for a long moment and said, "Okay, you I can work with." That was the whole speech. But from that morning on, I wasn't a vendor to Diane. I was the person she called, and Heartline, over the years, quietly became the thing holding the whole company up. The auditor arrived at the office about an hour after the announcement, while I was still sitting there with my envelope, trying to decide what kind of person I was going to be about all this. And I want to be honest with you about the 2 people I felt fighting inside me, because I think a lot of you know both of them. One of them was the good daughter, the one who'd swallowed everything for 15 years, the one who wanted to take the check and leave with her head up and never give them the satisfaction of seeing her hurt. She'd have called it dignity. She'd have driven home and cried in the garage where no one could see, and told everyone at Thanksgiving that it had all worked out for the best. The other one was quieter, and I trusted her less because I'd spent my whole life being told she was the difficult one. She wasn't loud, but she was steady, and she kept asking me one simple question over and over while Mr. Okafor set up his laptop. She kept asking, "What is it actually worth? The thing you built? Not to them. To the world. What is it worth?" And I didn't have an answer yet. But I was about to get one, whether I was ready for it or not. His name was Mr. Okafor, and he had a soft, careful voice and a laptop and a leather folder. And he sat up at the head of the conference table like a man who'd done this 100 times and had learned to keep his opinions to himself until the end. My parents had brought him in to put a value on the company. That's what you do before you transfer ownership. You get an independent number so the paperwork is clean, and nobody can say later that anyone got cheated. It was supposed to be a formality. My father actually said that word. He said, "This is just a formality. Mr. Okafor won't take long." And Mr. Okafor gave a small, polite nod that I would later understand was the nod of a man who already suspected it would take longer than that. I want to tell you about the night I almost quit, because it's the night that explains the folder. It was maybe 6 years ago. Heartline had come up for its first big contract renewal, and there'd been a scare, a competitor undercutting us hard, offering Diane a price we couldn't match without losing money. I spent 2 weeks and one truly sleepless night saving that account, driving out to Diane's office, restructuring the whole deal, staying up until 3 in the morning rebuilding the numbers so we could keep them without bleeding to death. And I did it. I saved the single most important client the company had. And the next morning, when I told my father, he was on his way out the door to Vanessa's birthday dinner, and he said, "Good, good," the way you'd say it to someone reporting that the coffee was made, and he left. That was it. Good, good. I stood in that office with the heater ticking, and I thought, very clearly and without any drama, they will never see me. Not because they can't, because they've decided not to. That was the night I stopped waiting to be seen and started, quietly, making sure the truth was written down somewhere. Not out of revenge. I need you to believe that, because it's the truest thing in this whole story. I wasn't plotting anything. I was just so tired of being told that what I did didn't count, that I wanted, somewhere, in some file, a record that it had. So when I restructured the Heartline renewal that night, I built in a clause. A small, boring, technical clause about the account relationship, the kind of thing nobody reads. A key person clause. It named me. It tied the contract's terms to my continued involvement because Diane trusted me and not a logo, and she'd said so plainly that she was signing with me. At the time, it felt like the only thing I'd ever done that officially admitted I mattered. I didn't know it was a loaded gun. I just knew it made me feel real. There was a year, somewhere in the middle of all this, when I nearly left for real. A competitor had heard about the work I was doing and made me an offer. More money, an actual title, a place where the people signing my checks didn't share my last name and therefore didn't come with 15 years of not seeing me. I had the letter printed out in my bag for a week. I'd take it out at red lights and read it. And the thing that stopped me wasn't my parents, and it wasn't loyalty to them, because by then I didn't have much of that left. It was the warehouse crew. It was Marcus, who ran our loading dock and had 3 kids and had covered for me the one time I'd needed covering. And it was the drivers who knew I was the person who'd fight for them when a client tried to squeeze us. If I left, the accounts might follow me. And if the accounts followed me, the people who loaded and drove them didn't have anywhere to go. So I stayed. I told myself it was for them, and it mostly was. But if I'm honest, there was still a small, stubborn part of me that stayed because I couldn't quite give up on the idea that one day my father would look up and finally see what I'd made. I put the letter through the shredder myself. I've thought about that letter a lot since that Tuesday. Years went by like that. I kept the accounts. I kept the peace. I kept my mouth shut. And I told myself that being needed was almost the same as being loved, which is a lie you can survive on for a surprisingly long time. I watched Vanessa get promoted into roles that existed because someone invented them for her. I watched her sit in on the meetings I'd done the preparation for and receive the thanks I'd earned. Once, at a client dinner, a man from one of our accounts leaned over and told my father that Vanessa was clearly the brains of the operation, and my father laughed and agreed. And I sat 3 seats down, having personally saved that man's account from a shipping disaster 2 weeks earlier. And I said nothing, because saying something was not a thing the responsible one was allowed to do. The one that stayed with me, though, was the company's 40th anniversary party. My father rented a hall and invited everyone, employees and clients, and half the neighborhood, and he stood up to give a speech about the 4 decades of Donovan Supply. He thanked my grandfather. He thanked my mother. He thanked, by name, 3 of the salesmen. And then he thanked Vanessa, his daughter, the future of the company, and the room applauded, and she stood and gave a little wave. He never said my name. Not once. I was standing near the back with a client I'd flown in myself. A client who turned to me confused and said, "Aren't you his daughter too?" And I smiled and said something light and went to check on the catering, because that was my job, keeping things running while other people got thanked for it. I drove home that night and I didn't cry, which somehow felt worse than crying because it meant I'd gotten used to it. So there we all were, back in that conference room, the envelope in front of me, Vanessa, the new owner, Mr. Okafor opening his leather folder. My parents relaxed because this was just a formality. And I made a decision. I'm not proud of how small it was. I decided I would stay quiet, take the check, and go. The way a good daughter goes, because making a scene had never once in my life gotten me anything but a reputation for being difficult. I'd let them have it. I'd let them have all of it. And then Mr. Okafor started asking questions, and the questions were about the accounts, and Vanessa couldn't answer a single one of them. It's a strange thing, watching someone try to hold a company they don't understand. Mr. Okafor asked about Heartline first, naturally, because it was the biggest line item on the page, and my father waved a hand and said Vanessa would be handling all client relationships going forward. So Mr. Okafor turned to Vanessa and asked her, politely, what the terms of the Heartline renewal were, since the file showed it was coming up in 90 days. And Vanessa smiled the smile she uses when she's been asked something she should know and doesn't, and she said she'd have to look into the specifics. My father jumped in to cover for her, the way he always did, and said the Heartline relationship was rock solid, been solid for years, nothing to worry about. And Mr. Okafor wrote something down, quietly, and I watched him write it, and something in my chest that had been asleep for a very long time opened one eye. Because I knew the Heartline account wasn't solid the way my father meant. I knew Diane had left a voicemail 3 weeks earlier that Vanessa had never returned, because Diane had then called me, privately, half apologizing, asking if everything was all right over there because she wasn't hearing back, and the renewal was coming and she didn't like surprises. I knew there was a competitor circling again. And I knew the entire thing was held together by a relationship that ran through me and only me, and that the family had just handed my sister a crown without knowing the one jewel in it was mine. They thought they were giving away a company. They didn't understand the shape of what they had. That's the thing about favoritism, and it's the thing I most want you to take from all of this. It doesn't just hurt the person on the wrong end of it. It makes you blind. It makes you unable to see clearly because you've spent so many years looking at one child that you've forgotten to actually look at the business, at where the money comes from, at who's really carrying the weight. My parents loved Vanessa so much they'd stopped being able to see the truth, even when it was sitting at the table with a folder in front of it. And the cruel joke of it, the part the universe seems to save for people like my father, is that the truth doesn't care who you love. The results don't lie. You can hand your favorite child the whole kingdom, but if she wasn't the one growing the crops, the harvest is going to tell on you eventually. Mr. Okafor kept going. He was methodical in a way that made my father start to shift in his seat. He wasn't valuing the company as a lump, the way my parents had assumed he would. He was tracing the profit. He was going account by account, asking where the margin actually lived, which clients were profitable, and which were just noise, who was signed to what, and for how long. And the more he traced, the quieter the room got, because every trail he followed kept leading to the same place. At one point, he stopped on a mid-sized account, a school district contract, and he noted that it carried an unusually high margin for its size, and he asked how the company had managed that. My father didn't know. He looked at Vanessa. Vanessa didn't know either. So, Mr. Okafor read the answer off the file, that the pricing had been restructured 3 years ago in a way that protected the margin while keeping the client, and he asked who had done the restructuring. And there was my name again, in a document, in a stranger's hands, doing the explaining that my family had never once done for me. Vanessa tried, to her credit, to say something useful. She said she'd been working closely with the accounts to prepare for the transition, but when Mr. Okafor asked her a simple follow-up, what the district's renewal date was, she went quiet, and the quiet answered for her. She hadn't been working closely with anything. She'd been standing near the work the way she always had, close enough to be photographed with it, never close enough to do it. My mother asked, with a little laugh, whether all this detail was really necessary. Mr. Okafor said, without looking up, that when the value of a company is concentrated in a small number of relationships, a buyer or a bank always wants to know how stable those relationships are, and that his job was to tell the truth about it. He said the word truth so plainly, so without weight, that nobody caught how much it was about to cost. And then he asked the question that turned the whole morning inside out. He looked up from his folder and he asked, to the room, who manages these top accounts day to day? Because the file shows one name on almost all of them. Nobody answered. My father looked at me, not with love, with calculation. It was the first time all morning he'd really looked at me, and it was because he'd suddenly started doing a piece of math he'd been avoiding for 15 years. And in that silence, Vanessa, my sister, the golden child, the new owner of everything, said in a small voice, Claire does. The auditor asked me to confirm it, and I did, because it was true, and I've never been able to lie about the work even when lying would have been easier. Yes, I said, I manage them. Heartline, and the 4 next largest, and most of the ones below that. I've managed them for years. My voice came out steadier than I felt, and I noticed my hands had stopped fidgeting with the envelope, because for the first time in that room, I wasn't a daughter being sentenced. I was a professional being asked a professional question, and that is a very different feeling, and I hadn't felt it inside that family in a long, long time. Mr. Okafor nodded and made a note and kept working, and the sound of him typing was the only sound in the room. My father tried to reassert control the way he always did. He said of course Claire handled the accounts. That's what she was there for, but that the real value was in the company itself. The name, the reputation, the systems he'd spent his life building. And Mr. Okafor did something then that I will remember for the rest of my life. He stopped typing. He looked at my father over the top of his glasses and he said kindly, because he wasn't a cruel man, he was just an honest one. Mr. Donovan, the systems don't renew the contracts. The relationships do. And I'm looking at the numbers, and I think everyone here should see them before you finalize anything. He turned the laptop around so the screen faced the table, and he pulled a single page out of the leather folder, the page that had been sitting there the whole time, the page I'd been staring at without knowing what it was. And he began to walk everyone through it, line by line, and I could feel the temperature in the room start to drop. The severance check was still sitting in front of me. $28,000. That was the number they'd decided 15 years was worth. $28,000 and a template with my name typed into it. I mention it now, at this exact moment, because I need you to hold it in your head next to the number Mr. Okafor was about to read, so you feel the size of the gap between what they thought I was worth and what I actually was. He started with the total. He said the company's operating profit for the last year, the real number after everything, and it was healthy, better than my parents probably even realized. And I saw my father sit up a little, pleased, because he heard a big number and assumed it was a compliment to him. And then Mr. Okafor said he wanted to show where that profit came from, because that was the part that mattered for anyone thinking about the future. He put up the breakdown, a color-coded chart a stranger had built in an afternoon, the anatomy of everything I'd done and no one had thanked me for. The Heartline account, the 4 accounts below it, the dozens below those, all of it shaded, all of it traced back through the relationships that held it, and almost all of that shading led to one place. My mother said my father's name, quietly, like a question. My father didn't answer. Vanessa had gone very still, and she was looking at the chart the way you look at a photograph of a place you thought you knew and are realizing you never really saw. I remember, in the half second before he spoke, thinking about the woman who'd driven in that morning with the good coffee waiting, the woman who'd walked in still believing she mattered to these people, and I wanted to reach back through the hours and tell her that she'd been right, just not in the way she'd hoped. She did matter. She'd always mattered. It was just that the proof of it was never going to come from the 3 people she'd spent her life trying to earn it from. It was going to come from a stranger with a laptop and a folder, reading a number he had no feelings about, in a room that had run out of things to say. Mr. Okafor took the small breath a careful man takes before he says the thing he came to say, and he told them he was going to give them the figure that mattered most, the share of the company's operating profit that flowed directly through the accounts managed by one person. He said it wasn't a criticism of anyone. He said it was simply the truth of where the value lived, and that they needed to know it before they signed the business over, because a company whose value depends on one individual is a very different thing to inherit than a company that runs on its own. He glanced at me before he said it, just for a second, and I've wondered since whether he understood more about that room than he let on, whether he knew he was about to hand me something no one in my family ever had. And then he read the number out loud. 68%. 68% of everything the company earned last year traced back through accounts that lived and died on my relationships. Not the name over the door. Not the systems my father built. Not the logo Vanessa designed. Me. He said it in his flat, honest voice, 68%. And then he let it sit there. And the room did the thing I described at the very start. The 3 seconds where nobody breathed. My father's coffee stopped halfway to his mouth. My mother's hand flat on the table. Vanessa, the color of the wall behind her. But he wasn't done. And this is the part that turned the number from a fact into a reckoning. He said there was one more thing the family needed to understand before finalizing the transfer, because it materially affected the value. He'd found it in the Heartline contract, a key person clause. He read it aloud too, in that same even voice, the small, boring paragraph I'd written at 3 a.m. 6 years earlier, when all I wanted was for one piece of paper in the world to admit I existed. The clause tied the terms of their single largest contract to my continued involvement. And the renewal, he reminded them, gesturing at the file, was due in 90 days. He asked mildly whether anyone had been in contact with the client's decision-maker recently, because a relationship that size usually required attention around a renewal. The silence after that question had a different quality than the one before it, because now my father understood, and my mother understood, and Vanessa understood most of all, that the voicemail Diane had left 3 weeks ago and nobody had returned was not a small thing. It was the whole thing. They had just handed my sister a company that was 2/3 built on a woman they'd spent 15 years deciding not to see, and the crown jewel of it was legally, contractually, personally tied to me. And it was 90 days from either renewing or walking out the door. And the only person in the building the client trusted was the one holding a $28,000 check and an invitation to leave. My father set his coffee down very slowly. He was a man who had spent 40 years being the smartest person in every room he walked into, and I watched him understand, in real time, that he had built a company he didn't actually run and had just given it to a daughter who couldn't run it either, and that the person who could was the one he'd priced at $28,000 an hour earlier. He opened his mouth and closed it. For the first time in my life, my father had nothing to say. My mother said my name, just my name, Claire, in a voice I hadn't heard her use since I was small, and there was something in it that might have been the beginning of an apology, though it was 15 years too late to arrive fully formed. And Vanessa, my sister, didn't get angry, which is what I'd expected. She did something worse. She looked at me across that table, across all those years, and she said, so quietly that I almost missed it, I didn't know it was all you. And the terrible thing, the thing that told me everything about the family we'd grown up in, was that I believed her. She hadn't known. They'd protected her from the truth so thoroughly that she'd never had to see me clearly either. And now she was seeing me, finally, with an expression I'd waited my entire life to find on someone's face when they looked at me, and I hated how much I still wanted it even now. Mr. Okafor closed his folder. He said quietly that he'd give the family a moment, and the check sat there in front of me, and the number hung in the air over the table, and every person in that room turned at last to look at me, and the only question left in the world was what I was going to do about it. I picked up the check. I want you to know I actually held it in my hand, felt how light it was, $28,000 for 15 years, and for one long moment the good daughter almost won. It would have been so easy to take it and go. Clean. Dignified. The story everyone at Thanksgiving could live with. But then I looked at that chart still glowing on the laptop. 68% of everything. And I thought about Diane waiting on a voicemail nobody had returned. And I thought about Marcus on the loading dock and the drivers and the accounts that only stayed because I stayed. And I realized the quiet daughter had been asking me the right question all morning. Not what will they give me? What is it worth? The thing I built. And I finally had the number. So I set the check back down on the table, unsigned, and I slid it a few inches back toward my mother, and I said, in a voice that surprised me with how steady it was, I'm not taking this, and I'm not leaving. I told them what I would do instead. I'd stay, and I'd keep the accounts, and I'd renew Heartline, because I was the only one who could. But not as an employee they could price out with a template. As a partner, with a real stake in the company my name had been holding up for 15 years, and with a seat at the table where the decisions got made. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't have to. The numbers had already done the shouting for me. My father, who had never in his life been at a loss for words, was at a loss for words. And here's the thing I understood watching his face. He didn't agree because he'd suddenly learned to love me. He agreed because he had no choice, and honestly, after 15 years, being needed loudly enough that they couldn't pretend otherwise was its own kind of justice. Not the warm kind I'd once wanted, but the true kind. The kind the results give you whether or not anyone means to. The part I didn't expect came after, when it was just Vanessa and me in the emptying room. She still had that look, the one I'd waited my whole life for, and she said she was sorry, and that she hadn't known, and that she didn't know how to be the person they'd told everyone she was. And for the first time, I saw that the favoritism hadn't just cost me. It had cost her too, in a different currency. They'd handed her a crown built on someone else's work and never taught her how to earn one of her own. I didn't forgive her right there. Some things don't move that fast. But I told her that if she wanted to actually learn the business, the real one, I'd show her. And she nodded, and it was the first honest thing to pass between us in years. I still drive to that building on the north side of Minneapolis, past the same gas station and the same crooked church sign. But I drive in different now, not hoping to be seen, just knowing what I'm worth, which turns out to be the thing I'd been trying to hear someone say my whole life. There's more to tell you about what happened next, about the Heartline renewal, and the two sisters trying to learn how to stand on the same ground for the first time. Because being seen, it turns out, is only where the story starts. Staying seen is a whole other fight, and that one I'm still living.